In most wars, danger announces itself loudly, with gunfire, with shouting, with explosions, but sometimes danger arrives quietly, so quietly that you don't realize it has entered the room. In occupied Europe during World War II, the Nazis believed they understood their enemy. They watched the roads, they listened to the radios, they followed the men they suspected. What they failed to notice was a young woman walking past them every day. Her name was Violette Szabo. She did not wear a uniform, she did not carry a weapon, and she did not look like a threat. And that is why she survived as long as she did. Violette had already lost someone she loved deeply, her husband, a soldier, killed in the war. She was left with grief and a small child and a future that suddenly felt very uncertain. Many people in her place would have chosen safety, silence, and survival. But Violette chose something else, not because she was fearless, but because she understood something others did not. That silence, in times like these, behind enemy lines, information was more valuable than bullets. Knowing who to trust, where to go, and when to disappear could mean the difference between life and death. Violette learned quickly. She learned how to listen without reacting, how to remember without writing anything down, and how to remain calm even when her heart was racing. The Nazis never imagined that a woman like her could be carrying secrets powerful enough to threaten them. But she was. Every step she took, every message she passed, brought her closer to discovery. And discovery meant interrogation. Interrogation meant torture, and torture meant a choice: to speak or to remain silent. She knew the price long before she paid it, yet she continued, not for glory, not for recognition, but because somewhere beyond the fear, beyond the occupation, she believed a different future was still possible, a future her daughter might live in. As the war tightened its grip and the net around resistance fighters grew smaller, Violette stepped deeper into danger, each mission more risky than the last, each mistake potentially her final one. And soon, the moment would come when her calm exterior would be tested beyond its limits, because the enemy was closer than she realized. And when they finally began to suspect her, it was already too late to turn back. What would Violette do when silence was no longer enough, and survival demanded something far greater? That is where her true story begins. They were not looking for heroes. They were looking for patterns, uniforms, weapons, men who looked like soldiers. That was how the enemy thought, and that was why they failed to notice her. Violette Szabo never arrived loudly. She did not announce herself. She did not demand attention. She moved quietly, observing more than speaking, listening more than acting. And long before anyone realized her importance, she had already made her choice. Violette Szabo was born into a world that did not expect her to change history. She was born in Paris, at a time when life still followed familiar rhythms. Families gathered, children laughed, and the idea of a global war felt distant. Her childhood was not extraordinary. There were no signs, no early indications of what she would become. She was intelligent, curious, and independent. She spoke more than one language, moved comfortably between cultures, and carried herself with quiet confidence. Those who knew her remembered her calm nature. She did not seek conflict, nor did she avoid responsibility. She lived simply, believing the future would unfold naturally. Then the war came, and with it, everything changed. The world that Violette knew began to shrink. Borders hardened, trust disappeared, and fear became a daily presence. She watched as ordinary streets filled with soldiers, as familiar faces grew cautious, as silence became a survival skill. It was during this time that she met Violette Szabo. He was a soldier, disciplined, committed, and deeply aware of the danger surrounding them. Their connection was immediate, built on shared understanding rather than words. They married quickly, aware that time was no longer guaranteed. Love during wartime did not come with promises, only moments, and those moments were brief. Etienne was sent to fight, and like so many others, he did not return. The news reached Violette quietly. There was no ceremony, no explanation that softened the truth. She was suddenly a widow with a child and a future she had never planned for. Grief did not break her loudly. It settled slowly, heavily, changing everything. She learned how loneliness felt, how uncertainty lingered, and how fear could shape daily life. But she also learned something else, that doing nothing was also a choice, and it was one she could not accept. Occupied Europe was a place where information mattered more than force. Knowing who moved where, who could be trusted, and who could not decided survival. Violette noticed how fear traveled, how it passed from one person to another without words. She noticed patterns, movements, silences. She listened. And when the opportunity came, it did not arrive as a dramatic call to action. It arrived quietly, a conversation, a suggestion, a question. Would she be willing to help? Not fight, not carry weapons, not confront soldiers, but to observe, to remember, to move unnoticed. She understood the risk immediately. Helping meant danger, and danger was unforgiving. But refusing meant something else. It meant accepting the world as it was becoming, and that she could not do. Her training was deliberate, methodical, and unforgiving. There were no speeches about heroism, only repetition, discipline, and silence. She learned codes, radio procedures, and how to disappear in plain sight. She was taught how to resist interrogation, not through strength, but through control. Control of breath, control of expression, control of thought. Fear, they told her, was natural, but reaction was dangerous. Violette absorbed everything. She did not rush. She did not panic. Under pressure, she became slower, more deliberate. Those who trained her noticed. Where others faltered, she steadied. Where others hesitated, she observed. She was not loud, but she was reliable. And reliability was rare. Her first mission was described as simple: enter occupied territory, observe movements, and return. But nothing behind enemy lines was ever simple. Each step required caution. Each interaction carried risk. Violette learned how to walk with purpose, without urgency. She learned how to meet eyes without revealing thought. She learned how to answer questions without offering information. The Nazis were trained to recognize fear. Violette learned how to hide it. Each successful mission increased her value and increased the danger. The resistance was fragmented. Small groups, isolated, constantly threatened. Trust was fragile and betrayal was common. Violette became a connector, a quiet link between people who never met. She carried names, locations, and plans, none written down, all memorized. Each return felt like borrowed time. Each crossing reminded her how easily everything could end. There were nights when doubt surfaced, moments when she thought of her daughter safe somewhere far away, moments when fear pressed heavily, but morning always came. She reminded herself why she continued, not for revenge, not for recognition, but because silence allowed cruelty to grow. As the war intensified, so did suspicion. Checkpoints multiplied, interrogations increased, arrests became frequent. The streets felt different, eyes lingered longer, questions sharpened. Violette noticed the change before anyone spoke of it. She understood what it meant. The enemy was adapting, and soon they would begin to look for someone like her. Still, she continued, because stopping meant abandoning everyone she had already helped, and because retreat at this stage was no longer possible. On what was meant to be another routine mission, something felt wrong, a delay, a roadblock that should not have been there, a glance that lasted too long. In that moment, Violette understood something clearly. The danger she had been avoiding was no longer behind her. It was directly ahead. And the choices she made next would shape everything that followed. As she stepped forward, keeping her pace steady, her face calm, her thoughts controlled, she asked herself one silent question. How much longer could invisibility protect her now that the enemy had begun to see? How much longer could invisibility protect her now that the enemy had begun to see? Violette did not stop walking. She kept her pace steady, her posture relaxed, her face unreadable. But inside, something had shifted. The war had changed its shape for her. What once felt dangerous now felt exposed. The roadblock she passed that day stayed with her, not because of what happened, but because of what almost did. The officer's eyes had lingered just long enough to register curiosity. Curiosity was dangerous. That night, in a safe place meant for rest, Violette replayed every moment in her mind. The questions, the tone, the pause before she was waved through. They were learning, and once the enemy learned, they adapted. The resistance network felt the change too. Meetings became shorter, messages more cautious, movement more restricted. Someone had been arrested. No one knew who, only that the silence around it felt heavy. Violette understood what that meant. Every arrest tightened the net. Every mistake reduced the margin for survival. Her next mission arrived without warning. There was no time to hesitate. Information was needed urgently, and there were few left who could move freely. Violette accepted without discussion. She knew the risks had increased. She also knew refusing would draw attention, and attention was fatal. This mission required her to travel deeper into occupied territory, past towns already watched closely, past checkpoints reinforced by recent arrests. She prepared carefully, memorizing details, destroying notes, leaving nothing behind. Before leaving, she paused. Not out of fear, but out of awareness. She thought of her daughter, of how small her hands had felt, wrapped around her own. Violette did not allow herself to linger on that thought. She had learned that hesitation weakened resolve. Crossing into enemy-controlled areas this time felt different. The air itself seemed tense. Soldiers moved with sharper purpose, their questions more precise. At one checkpoint, she was stopped longer than usual. Her papers were examined, then examined again. The officer asked questions that had not been rehearsed. Questions meant to disrupt, to provoke reaction. Violette answered calmly. She did not rush, did not over-explain, did not challenge authority. Minutes passed. Finally, she was waved through. She walked away slowly. Only when she turned the corner, out of sight, did she allow herself a single breath. But the feeling did not fade. That night, she met her contact in a place chosen for its anonymity. No greetings, no pleasantries, only whispered exchanges. The information she received confirmed her fears. Arrests were increasing. Interrogations were becoming more brutal. Someone had spoken. No one knew who or how much. Trust became even more fragile. Every message she carried now felt heavier. Every step more deliberate. As she moved through streets she once knew well, she noticed subtle changes. Shutters closed earlier. People avoided eye contact. Conversations ended abruptly. Fear had become visible. On her return journey, she sensed she was being followed. Not openly, but carefully. Reflections in windows. Footsteps that matched her pace. She altered her route just slightly. The presence remained. Her heart beat faster, but her face remained calm. She entered a crowded area, then exited suddenly. The footsteps disappeared, or perhaps they simply learned patience. By the time she reached safety, Violette understood the truth. Her freedom was narrowing. She was no longer just a messenger. She was becoming a liability, and liabilities were removed. The resistance leadership noticed as well. Conversations turned cautious. Her missions were discussed with hesitation, not because of doubt in her ability, but because of the risk she carried. Violet listened quietly. She did not argue. She understood their concern, but she also understood something else. If she stopped now, others would have to take her place, and they would be less prepared, less experienced, more vulnerable. So she volunteered again, against unspoken caution, against growing danger. Her final mission before capture began like the others, quietly, without ceremony. She was to gather confirmation of troop movements, nothing more. But as she moved toward the meeting point, she felt it immediately. The stillness, too complete. The absence of normal life. Her contact was late. Very late. Violette slowed her steps, watched reflections, listened. Then she heard it. Footsteps. Not hurried, not uncertain. Measured, confident. The moment stretched. And in that moment, Violette understood something with absolute clarity. Luck, which had protected her so long, was finally running out as hands reached for her arms and voices spoke calmly in a language she understood all too well. She did not resist. She did not speak. She allowed herself one final thought, not of fear, but of resolve. Because even now, even here, she knew something they did not. Silence, if held long enough, could still protect others. And that knowledge was worth everything. As hands closed around her arms and calm voices spoke in controlled tones, Violette did not resist. Resistance would have changed nothing. It would only confirm suspicion. Instead, she allowed herself to be guided forward, her steps measured, her expression calm. Inside, her mind slowed deliberately. Training replaced instinct. Fear was acknowledged, then set aside. She had prepared for this moment. The street she was taken from returned to its ordinary rhythm quickly. People looked away. Windows remained closed. Life continued as if nothing had happened. That was how arrests worked now. Quietly, efficiently. She was led through corridors that smelled of cold stone and paperwork. Her belongings were taken, placed carefully on a table, examined without comment. Nothing incriminating was found. That did not matter. The room they brought her into was small, plain, designed to feel insignificant. A chair, a table, a single light. No symbols, no uniforms meant to intimidate. This was not a place for spectacle. It was a place for pressure. The first questions were simple. Name, origin, reason for travel. Violette answered calmly. Truth mixed with harmless detail. She had learned that lies required memory. Truth, carefully framed, required less effort. The man across from her listened without reaction. He wrote nothing down. That unsettled her more than anger would have. Silence, she knew, was a tool. Hours passed. Or perhaps minutes. Time dissolved into uncertainty. Questions repeated, slightly altered, designed to catch inconsistency. Violette kept her rhythm. Short answers. No elaboration. Her voice steady. Her breathing controlled. At times, the man would leave the room. At other times, another would enter, different faces, same intent. They were mapping her reactions, not her answers. Fatigue became a factor, not overwhelming, but persistent. Lights never dimmed. Sounds echoed unpredictably. Discomfort was intentional. She focused inward, counted breaths, recalled training. Fear, she reminded herself, would not protect anyone. Silence might. At one point, a photograph was placed on the table. A familiar street, a building she had passed. They were closer than she had thought. Violette gazed to rest briefly, then looked away. No recognition, no reaction. The photograph was removed. Another followed, then another. Faces, places, moments meant to provoke memory. She did not respond, not because she felt nothing, but because feeling could be dangerous. The tone shifted. Questions became sharper, voices louder, accusations implied, never stated directly. They were offering her a role, a collaborator, someone who could help herself by helping them. Violette understood the strategy. They wanted her to believe resistance was pointless, that the network was already compromised, that speaking would change nothing. She remained quiet. At one moment, alone in the room, she allowed herself a single thought. Her daughter, not the child she had left behind, but the woman she might become. That image grounded her. When the questioning resumed, Violette appeared unchanged. Eventually, she was moved, not freed, transferred. The building changed, but the purpose did not. Days passed, or perhaps weeks. Sleep came in fragments. Food was minimal. The pressure constant. They tested patience, then pain, then silence again. Through it all, Violette endured. Not because she believed she would survive. At one point, she realized the questions were no longer exploratory, they were confirmatory. They knew parts of the truth, but not enough. That knowledge strengthened her resolve. She had become a barrier. And barriers, even temporary ones, had value. There were moments of weakness, moments when exhaustion blurred focus, moments when despair whispered possibility. But even then, she did not surrender. She reminded herself why she had chosen this path. Not for glory, not for recognition, but because surrender would erase meaning. The war outside continued. She could hear distant sounds, feel vibrations through walls. Life did not pause for prisoners, and neither could resolve. Eventually, the interrogation slowed. The faces grew colder, the patience thinner. They understood something she already knew. She would not give them what they wanted. And that understanding changed everything. One night, as she was moved again, without explanation, Violette sensed the shift. This was no longer about information. It was about consequence. As doors closed behind her, an unfamiliar wall surrounded her. She prepared herself, not with fear, but with acceptance, because even now, even here, she knew the truth. Her silence had already mattered, and whatever came next would not undo that. As she settled into the stillness, listening to distant echoes, Violette asked herself one final question. How much could one person endure when endurance was the last form of resistance left? Violette began to understand the answer not in moments, but in days that blended into one another. She was moved again, this time without questions, without explanations, without the illusion of choice. The place was different from before. Larger, colder, designed not for interrogation, but for disappearance. The walls were thick, the corridors long, and the air carried a silence that felt permanent. This was not a place meant to extract information. It was a place meant to break people. Violette was given a number, not a name. Her identity, once carefully guarded, was reduced to a routine. Wake, stand, wait. Food arrived without comment. Sometimes it was enough, sometimes it was not. Time lost its structure. Days were counted not by dates, but by small changes. A different guard, a colder night, a weaker body. At first, her thoughts raced. She replayed conversations, faces, routes. Then, slowly, she learned to stop. Memory could be dangerous now. Holding on to details that no longer mattered only deepened pain. Instead, she focused on control, control of posture, control of breathing, control of reaction. When guards shouted, she did not flinch. When silence stretched, she did not fill it. She learned that stillness unsettled them. That calm defiance, unspoken, created discomfort. Interrogations returned, but they were different now. Less patient, more direct. They no longer asked gently. They accused. They demanded. They threatened. Violette listened without responding. Her silence frustrated them. They wanted fear. They wanted pleading. They wanted collapse. They did not get it. Pain arrived, sometimes sudden, sometimes deliberate. But pain, she discovered, was temporary. Breaking resolve required something else. They tried isolation, long periods without sound, without movement, without human presence. It was during those moments, alone in darkness, that endurance was tested most. Violette returned to one thought repeatedly. Her daughter, not as she was, but as she might become, free, living in a world without occupation. That vision anchored her. It gave suffering context. Days became weeks. Weeks became something harder to measure. Her body weakened. Illness arrived quietly, but her mind, disciplined through intention, remained intact. She observed others when she could. Women and men, all reduced to survival. Some spoke too quickly. Some resisted loudly. Most endured quietly. Violette recognized something profound. Resistance did not always look like action. Sometimes It looked like survival. Sometimes it looked like refusing to disappear internally. She learned to communicate without words, a glance, a brief nod, a shared moment of recognition. Those small exchanges reminded her she was not alone, that courage existed in many forms. Guards rotated. Some were indifferent, some cruel, some visibly uncomfortable. Violet noticed which ones avoided her eyes. They were the ones who understood. The war outside reached them only in fragments, distant sounds, occasional tension in routines, whispers among guards. She sensed shifts, not victory, but movement, change, hope. Dangerous though it was, began to exist again. At one point, she was transferred yet again. This journey felt final, the distance longer, the conditions harsher. She did not ask where she was going. She already suspected. The place was stark, surrounded by wire, guarded heavily, designed to erase individuality. Here rules were strict, punishments immediate, mercy rare. Yet even here, Violet refused to surrender herself. She stood straight when possible. She spoke only when required. She did not plead, those around her noticed. Not admiration, but recognition. Strength, quiet and controlled, was contagious. When despair threatened others, her calm presence offered something unspoken. That survival was still possible. That dignity could exist even here. As conditions worsened, her health declined. But her resolve did not. She understood that her body might fail. That possibility no longer frightened her. What mattered was that she had not failed in purpose. She had not spoken. She had not betrayed trust. And that, she believed, would outlast her. In rare moments of rest, she reflected on the path that had led her here. Not with regret, but with acceptance. She had chosen this fully, knowingly. The world might never understand the cost, but understanding was not required. Meaning was, as the months passed, the war moved toward its conclusion. She sensed it in subtle ways. The urgency of guards, the tension in the air, the uncertainty that replaced arrogance. Yet her situation did not improve. Some endings, she realized, were not meant to be survived. That truth did not diminish her resolve. It clarified it. On one quiet night, as she lay awake listening to distant sounds, Violet accepted what was coming, not with despair, but with calm certainty. Her endurance had served its purpose. Her silence had mattered, and nothing that followed could erase that. As she closed her eyes, steadying her breath, she asked herself one final question. If this was the end, had she remained true to herself? The answer came easily. Yes. If this was the end, had she remained true to herself? The answer had come easily then, and it remained unchanged now. Yes, Violet carried that certainty with her as the days continued, quiet, unremarkable to those who watched, but deeply significant to those who endured beside her. There were no announcements, no explanations, only subtle changes. Guards spoke less, moved faster, avoided eye contact. The air itself felt different. Uncertainty had replaced confidence. Violette sensed that the war was shifting, not toward mercy, but toward conclusion. She did not allow herself to hope for rescue. Hope, unchecked, could be cruel. Instead, she focused on acceptance. Acceptance was not surrender. It was clarity. She understood now that survival was no longer the measure of success. Meaning was, her silence had held. Her resolve had not wavered. And that was enough. The final transfer came without warning. She was told nothing, asked nothing, given no opportunity to prepare. The journey was quiet. Those around her understood without speaking. This was not another prison. This was the last one. Violette remained composed. She did not resist, did not plead, did not look away. Fear, which once demanded attention, now felt distant. She had lived with it too long to be ruled by it now. In the final place, there was no cruelty for cruelty's sake. Only procedure, efficiency, indifference. And yet, even here, Violette carried herself with dignity. She stood straight. She met eyes calmly. She spoke only when required. Those small acts, insignificant to her captors, were acts of defiance. She thought again of her daughter, not with pain, but with a quiet wish that she would grow up free, that she would never need to learn silence as a weapon, that she would live in a world where courage did not require secrecy. Violette understood now that her life had become something larger than herself, not in fame, not in recognition, but in consequence. Others had remained free because she had not spoken. Others would survive because she had endured. That knowledge settled within her, steady, unshakable. When the moment arrived, it did not come with drama. There were no speeches, no final words demanded. Only routine, only silence. Violette did not close her eyes. She did not turn away. She remained present, calm, aware. In that final instant, she carried no regret. She had chosen this path knowingly. She had lived according to her values, and she would end the same way. After the war, the world would slowly learn her name. Reports would surface. Connections would be made. The quiet woman, the messenger, the one who never spoke, she would be honored. Medals would be awarded. Stories would be told. But those who read what mattered most had already been done. Violette Szabo's legacy was not written in documents. It was written in lives preserved, in missions completed, in resistance that endured because she did not break. She did not change the war alone, but she changed outcomes. She delayed cruelty. She protected others. And in doing so, she reshaped what courage meant. Courage, she proved, was not always loud. It did not always stand in the open. Sometimes it sat in silence. Sometimes it endured without recognition. Sometimes it refused to speak. For those who came after, her story became a reminder that strength does not require survival, that victory is not always visible, that meaning is not measured by how long one lives, but by how one chooses to live. Violette Szabo did not see the world she helped protect, but that world exists because of choices like hers. Quiet, uncelebrated, unbroken, and today, as her story is remembered, it carries a simple truth that even in the darkest moments, one person's resolve can matter. That silence, held with purpose, can be stronger than any weapon. And that courage, when chosen fully, never truly disappears. It remains in memory, in meaning, in the lives it touched.